The bus coughed out a plume of gray smoke as it pulled away from the curb, leaving Henry standing alone on the sidewalk with nothing but a battered suitcase and a plastic bag of groceries. The cold bit through his thin coat, and he pulled it, tighter as the wind whispered through the trees. He looked up at the massive house, his house once, now occupied by his adopted son, David. He didn't cry. Henry Walker hadn't shed a tear since the day he buried his wife 40 years ago, but something in his chest ached like a ghost knocking on the walls of a forgotten room. He shifted his weight on his bad knee, adjusted his cap, and turned away. They say time changes people. Maybe it did, or maybe time simply reveals who they were all along. Henry's life had always been a tapestry of rough threads and invisible gold. Born to a poor coal miner in 1942, he learned early how to survive. His father died when he was 10, crushed beneath a collapsed shaft. His mother succumbed to pneumonia 2 winters later. Henry survived, not because of luck or kindness, but because he refused to give up. He worked, relentlessly, scrubbing dishes, sweeping floors, even shining shoes at the train station for a nickel a pair. By 17, he'd saved enough to buy a rusted-out pickup and start his own odd jobs business. It didn't take long before he turned that into a small moving company, then a storage facility, then another. Over the next 5 decades, Henry Walker quietly built an empire, Walker Holdings. But few knew it was his. He operated through shell companies and proxies, investing in real estate, tech startups, and blue-chip stocks. He never lived like a rich man. No flashy cars, no silk suits. Just an old man in a flannel shirt who smiled more than he spoke. But life had one regret. Children never came. His beloved wife, Margaret, passed before they could adopt. He never remarried. The silence of his house became a companion, not a curse. That changed in 1998 when he met David. The boy had been 11, scrawny, stubborn, and angry at the world. Henry had met him through a community mentorship program in a rough part of the city. David had bounced between foster homes, getting expelled from one school after another. His file was full of red ink, fighting, theft, disrespect. But Henry saw something else. He remembered watching the boy draw quietly in the corner of a dingy group home, ignoring the chaos around him. The sketch was of a tree, gnarled and broken, yet still reaching toward the sun. "I drew that tree when I lived." "On the street," David had said when Henry asked. "What happened to the roots?" Henry had asked. The boy shrugged. Didn't have any. That night, Henry made a decision. Not out of pity, not even out of charity. He saw himself in David, untamed, bruised by the world, yet unbroken. The adoption wasn't easy. There were court visits, home inspections, even accusations from social workers who didn't understand why an aging widower wanted a troubled teen. But Henry persevered. David became his son, and for a time, they were a family. Henry taught David everything he knew, not just about money and work, but about character. He took the boy fishing, made him do chores, showed him how to balance a budget, fix a leaky faucet, change a tire. More importantly, he taught him about integrity. "Never measure a man by what he has," Henry would say. "Measure him by what he gives." David listened, at first. He improved in school. He stopped getting into fights. He even helped Henry run the storage units on weekends. People in the neighborhood said he was a different kid. But things changed as David got older. College came. Henry paid for it in full. No loans, no questions. David wanted to study business. Henry approved, even proud. But something shifted in those 4 years. The boy who once sat beside Henry on the porch, drinking root beer and watching fireflies, returned with designer clothes and an air of superiority. He still called Henry Dad, but the word began to feel hollow. Now, at 35, David ran the public-facing parts of Walker Holdings. Henry had quietly transferred legal ownership to shell companies, allowing David to believe he was the full heir. Not because Henry didn't trust him, but because he wanted to see who David would become without knowing what he truly had. What he became was disappointing, arrogant, wasteful, obsessed with status. He drove a Range Rover, wore Rolex watches, attended parties with people who had no idea the old man in the cardigan and jeans sitting quietly in the corner was the one who built it all. And then came the breaking point. "Dad, we need to talk." David had said one rainy Sunday morning, standing in the grand living room with its marble fireplace and polished oak floors. Henry set down his newspaper. "Sure, son." David didn't sit. "It's about the house, about everything." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "You've been slowing down, forgetting things. You've got, what, maybe a decade left? Maybe less." Henry chuckled. "Well, I'd hoped for a little more than that." David didn't laugh. "This place, it's a symbol of the company now, of who we are. Clients come here, investors. We can't have an old man shuffling around in slippers making it look like a retirement home." Henry stared at his son for a long moment. "Are you asking me to leave my home?" "I'm asking you to think about what's best for the company," David replied coldly. "There's a very nice senior residence just outside the city. Private, high-end. I'll pay for it." Henry stood slowly. "You won't have to." And just like that, he packed. No argument, no anger, no explanation. Now standing on the sidewalk outside the gate, Henry took one last look. He reached into his coat pocket and ran his fingers over the small brass key. The key to a vault in a private Swiss bank account. One of several. Inside that vault, tucked between bearer bonds and gold certificates, was a single envelope. On the UR envelope, written in Henry's deliberate handwriting, were the words, "For my son, when he finally learns what matters." But Henry wasn't ready to give it to him. Not yet. He took the bus downtown, found a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, paid 6 months' rent in cash under a false name. He bought a second-hand radio, a kettle, and a twin mattress. Every morning, he walked to the corner cafe, helped the owner sweep the sidewalk, and drank black coffee with the regulars. No one knew he had millions tucked away. He liked it that way. Sometimes, he watched the news and saw David posing with celebrities, or announcing another acquisition. He never smiled. He kept a small notebook where he wrote his thoughts each night. One entry read, "David has everything he ever wanted, except the one thing I tried hardest to give him, humility." One night, while helping an elderly woman carry groceries up her stairs, she asked him, "Do you have family?" He paused. "I used to." She nodded as if she understood. Time passed. Seasons changed. Henry found peace in simplicity. And yet beneath it all, the ache remained, less like a wound, more like a scar. He didn't hate David. He pitied him. The world had given the boy everything, but it had also taken his soul in exchange. Still, Henry had hope. Not that David would beg for forgiveness, but that one day, the man he once saw drawing a broken tree would finally understand what it meant to grow roots. Until then, Henry waited, patient, quiet, watching, and hiding a secret that would one day shatter David's world. The boy didn't speak for the first week. Henry remembered that vividly, the way David stared out the window of the old truck during the ride. Home, arms crossed tight across his chest, his jaw set in defiance. 11 years old, skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, and eyes that had seen more than any child ever should. Henry didn't force conversation. He just drove. They passed miles of farmland, silos and crooked fences. The world rolled by in silence, broken only by the low hum of the truck engine and the occasional grunt of a gear shift. When they reached Henry's property, an old Victorian house just outside town, David finally spoke. "Is this some kind of halfway house?" Henry turned off the ignition and looked at him. "Nope, just a house, my house, and now yours too." David scoffed. "Right, but he stepped out anyway." The next few days were quiet. Henry set up a room for him. Painted walls, a desk, clean sheets, and a small shelf for books. He didn't ask questions, didn't press. Instead, he showed David the ropes, how to collect eggs from the chicken coop, how to split wood, how to fold laundry properly. David followed orders like a soldier, but he didn't smile. Not once, until the dog arrived. Henry had found the mutt outside the hardware store one afternoon, skinny, one ear flopped sideways, tail wagging as if it had never known sadness. He opened the passenger door and said, "Come on, buddy." When David saw the dog, he narrowed his eyes. "We don't need a dog. He needs us," Henry said. David shrugged and walked away. But that night, Henry peeked into David's room and found the boy asleep, with the dog curled up beside him. From that day forward, something shifted. They began eating meals together. David still didn't talk much, but he listened. Henry told stories about working in the mines as a boy, about how he built his first business, about falling in love with Margaret. "She made the best peach pie this side of Mississippi," he'd say, tapping his spoon on his coffee mug with a smile. One day, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, David finally asked, "What happened to her?" "She passed before I met you," Henry said quietly. "Cancer, fast and cruel." David nodded. "My mom overdosed, foster mom number 3. They didn't speak for a long while after that. Just watched the fireflies rise from the grass." School was hard for David. He had a reputation, a trail of suspensions and failed classes. Teachers didn't trust him. Students avoided him. But Henry didn't give up. He met with the principal, the teachers, even the janitor. "I'm not looking for favors," he told them. "I'm asking for patience and a fair shot." At home, he helped David with his homework, taught him how to outline essays, how to break down math problems. When David got his first B on a history test, he slammed the paper down on the table and shouted, "Look!" Henry grinned. "Told you that brain's good for more than attitude." David laughed for the first time, a real laugh, deep and uncontrollable. "It was the best sound Henry had heard in years. One Saturday, Henry drove them to the edge of town to visit a rundown lot. Weeds climbed over broken fences. A half-collapsed building leaned dangerously to one side. "What is this place?" David asked. Henry tossed him a set of keys. "Our future." It was an old storage facility, 12 units, all in bad shape. Henry had bought it cheap from a retiring veteran. Over the next year, he and David worked every weekend to restore it. They cleaned graffiti, patched drywall, installed new doors. Henry taught David how to use a power drill, how to budget for repairs, how to negotiate with vendors. "This is how you build something," he said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not with money, with sweat, with time, with patience." By the end of the year, the facility was full. Tenants paid monthly. Henry let David manage the books. They reinvested profits into a second property, then a third. David started to believe in himself. He had value, a role, a reason to get up in the morning, and for a while they were more than just a foster parent and child. They were family. But pain has a long memory. At school, David still carried shadows. He got into a fight when a kid made fun of his old shoes. Another when someone called him charity case. Each time, Henry didn't punish him with anger, but with conversation. "Son," he said once after picking him up from the principal's office, "your fists can't solve every problem." David looked down. "They're the only things that ever worked before. Well, maybe it's time to try something else." "Like what?" "Like listening. Like walking away. Like proving them wrong by becoming better." David didn't respond, but something in him listened. Years passed. The dog got older. So did Henry. But their bond grew. On David's 16th birthday, Henry took him to the DMV and helped him get his permit. That night they sat on the porch again, the dog between them, sipping root beer. "You ever think about where all this ends up?" David asked. Henry raised an eyebrow. "Like what? You got all these businesses, money, property. What happens when you're gone?" Henry smiled faintly. "It'll go to someone who deserves it."
David looked confused. "Like me?" Henry didn't answer directly. "Keep doing what you're doing and we'll see." David graduated high school with honors. He got into a good university on the strength of his grades, leadership, and
the personal essay he wrote titled, "The Man Who Taught Me How to Be One." Henry wept when he read it, but never told David. At college, things changed. Distance opened between them, not just physical, but emotional. David made new friends, found new mentors. He called less often, visited only on holidays. When he came home, he brought gifts, new gadgets, trendy clothes, bottles of expensive cologne. "You like this stuff?" he asked once, handing Henry a luxury watch. Henry shook his head. "It's beautiful, but I don't need it." "You could wear it to meetings. Show people you're still sharp." "I'd rather show them with my words and actions." David laughed, but there was an edge in it. Henry felt the shift, subtle at first, like a hairline crack in a foundation. But it widened with time. After graduation, David didn't come home. He moved to the city, took over operations of Walker Holdings, believing he'd earned the position solely by merit. Henry let him believe it. He stepped into the background, quietly observing. The boardroom replaced the porch. Lattes replaced root beer. Dad was replaced with Henry in emails. The boy who once watched fireflies now chased spotlights. And Henry, heart heavy, realized. The tree had grown tall, but the roots were shallow. One day, while sorting through old files in the attic, Henry found a folder labeled David Drawings. Inside were dozens of sketches, trees, houses, even one of the two of them sitting on the porch with the dog. He smiled as he turned the pages, fingers trembling slightly. So much love, so much time. Could it all be lost? Not lost, he reminded himself, just buried. And maybe, one day, the boy would dig deep enough to find it again. Henry watched the boardroom presentation from the back row, hands folded across his lap. David stood at the head of the long glass conference table, flanked by polished suits and manicured smiles. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline of concrete and steel, the trappings of success. "If we leverage the Riverton properties as collateral, we can acquire ClearPath Logistics and double our warehouse footprint in Q2, David said, gesturing to a sleek slide deck. The room nodded in impressed silence. Someone clapped. Henry didn't. Not because the plan was bad. It wasn't. It was smart, ambitious, maybe even brilliant. But it wasn't thoughtful. David's pitch was all numbers and power plays. Nothing about the workers, the neighborhoods they'd impact, or the long-term sustainability. The son Henry had once taught to balance hard work with heart was now dazzling a room full of men who measured worth in net gain alone. After the meeting, David approached him. "Well?" he asked, flashing a confident grin. "What did you think, Henry?" Took a breath. "It'll make money. But at what cost?" David's smile faded. "What do you mean?" "You're moving fast, aggressive. That works, for a while, but it's like a wildfire, burns everything in its path." David frowned. "You've always told me to take initiative." "I told you to lead with purpose," Henry corrected. "Not greed." David looked away, jaw tightening. "Things are different now. We're not just managing a few storage units. This is a national brand. You have to think bigger." Henry nodded slowly. "Just remember who helped build the foundation." The tension grew from there, quiet at first, like a low hum in the background. Meetings where David forgot to invite him. Strategic decisions made without consulting the man who still technically owned 60% of the assets through offshore trusts. Henry didn't argue. He observed. He watched David hire high-priced consultants and marketing firms, launching ad campaigns that boasted luxury and dominance. He rebranded Walker Holdings with a sleek new logo, dropped the Walker name from some regional subsidiaries altogether. Modernization, David explained when Henry questioned him. It's erasure, Henry replied. David rolled his eyes. You're sentimental. That's why we need new blood. And you think sentiment has no value? Henry asked. David's silence said enough. The wedge widened at home too. David had moved into the main house shortly after his graduation. It was meant to be temporary, a place to stay while he looked for something permanent. But months became years. He renovated rooms without asking, threw loud parties, hired a private chef, and referred to Henry's home-cooked meals as rustic nostalgia. Once, Henry entered the kitchen to find David berating a housekeeper for misplacing his imported wine. You talk to people like that, Henry said calmly after she left, and you'll find yourself very alone. David snapped. Spare me the lecture. This isn't a charity home. Henry simply walked away. But the words lingered. Then came her, Samantha. Elegant, cold, dressed like she walked out of a fashion catalog and acted like the house belonged to her. She was David's girlfriend, soon fiancée. She called Henry Mr. Walker, though he'd asked her to call him Henry more than once. At first, Henry gave her the benefit of the doubt. People can be guarded when nervous. But as weeks turned to months, he noticed how often she spoke for David, made decisions with him, yet dismissed Henry as an old relic when she thought he wasn't listening. One evening, while David was out, Henry overheard her on the phone. No, babe, he's harmless. But we can't let him linger too long. The company needs a clean look for investors. Yeah, exactly. I think it's time we started moving him out. Henry didn't confront her. He didn't need to. A man doesn't need to be warned when the cold sets in. He feels it long before the frost. A few weeks later, during breakfast, David brought it up. I've been thinking, Dad. Maybe you should take a break. Travel a bit. Enjoy retirement. Henry looked up from his toast. I enjoy being here, David hesitated. I mean, maybe it's time to scale back. We've got a condo for you in Savannah. Right on the coast. Quiet. Warm. Samantha says it'll be good for your joints. Henry sipped his coffee. And what do you say? I say, it's best for everyone. Henry nodded once, set his cup down. You want me out? David winced. That's not how I'd put it. But that's what it is. Come on, don't be dramatic. I gave you a home when you had none, Henry said, voice level. Taught you everything I know. And now you want me out because I don't fit the image, David sighed. You're stuck in the past. No, Henry said. I remember the past. You, on the other hand, seemed determined to forget it. They didn't speak for days after that. Henry began spending more time away from the house. He took long walks, visited the old properties on the outskirts of town. He even drove to the very first storage lot they'd rebuilt together, still standing, still sturdy. A tenant named Grace remembered him. Mr. Walker, she called, waving from her unit. Still checking in after all these years? He smiled. Just making sure it hasn't fallen apart. Not a chance, she said proudly. You built it right. That night, Henry returned home to find all his things neatly packed. His old recliner, books, photo albums, boxed and labeled with surgical precision. A handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter. Dad, we've arranged everything. The condo's ready. You'll love it. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. David and Samantha. Henry stood in silence. Even the dog's ashes, kept in a small urn on the fireplace, had been boxed. He packed what little he cared to take. Left the rest. No goodbyes, no drama. He left a letter, though. Short, bare. I hope one day you remember where your roots are. H. Then he walked out the door, got on a city bus, and disappeared from David's life without another word. Back. In the city, David poured himself a drink and clinked glasses with Samantha. "That went better than I thought," she said. "He'll be fine," David replied. "He needs peace." "He needed to stop being a ghost in your empire," she corrected. "Now you're the face of it." David nodded slowly. "Yeah, I am." But even as the alcohol warmed his chest, something cold lingered in his throat. A small voice, quiet, unrelenting. "You didn't just evict a man. You buried a legacy you never understood." 2 years passed. Walker Holdings reached a national scale. David's name headlined conferences, financial magazines, and tech panels. Samantha was now his wife and unofficial PR strategist. They lived in a penthouse above the city, and neither had uttered Henry's name in months, until the letter came. It arrived by courier, a heavy envelope sealed in wax, bearing the unmistakable slant of Henry's handwriting. David didn't open it right away. He left it on his desk for hours, half expecting it to vanish like a ghost, but curiosity gnawed at him. When he finally slit it open, a single-page letter slid out, along with a small brass key and a photo, one of him and Henry on the porch. Years ago, the dog between them. The letter read, "Dear David, you were once a boy who believed love could be earned through hard work. You were right. What you built is impressive. But what you lost in the process is greater. There's a safety deposit box in Walker Ridge Bank, branch 14. The key is yours now. Everything inside belongs to you. No lawyers, no fanfare. Just one final lesson. Sometimes the richest things we own are the ones we abandon." David stared at the letter, stunned. He hadn't heard from Henry since the day he left. And now, this, a deposit box, something about it unnerved him. The next morning, David arrived at the bank. The vault attendant led him down a cold, narrow corridor. The box was long, narrow, and surprisingly heavy. Inside were 6 items: a leather journal, a USB drive, a notarized trust document, an old pocket watch, a land deed, a cashier's check. The check was made out to David Walker in the amount of $100 million. David's breath caught. He flipped open the journal. It was Henry's handwriting again, page after page. Notes, letters, reflections. Thoughts never said aloud. It started with the day Henry met David. It chronicled his struggles, his joys, his failures, and his fears. It wasn't money that overwhelmed David. It was the care, the patience, the meticulous documentation of a love never spoken but always lived. The USB drive held years of financial records, offshore holdings, crypto wallets, equity stakes. Henry had diversified in silence. The land deed? A massive tract. In Montana, untouched forest, valued at over $30 million alone. The trust document? It passed everything to David, on one condition. David had to build a foundation, the Henry Walker Initiative, that would support foster children aging out of the system. In his will, Henry wrote, "If you wish to keep the wealth, you must return it to where it came from. A boy once lost, who needed more than money. Give others what I gave you. And maybe, one day, you'll find what you lost along the way." David sat in his penthouse for hours that night. The city buzzed beneath him. The skyline gleamed, but inside, he was hollow. The next morning, he called a board meeting. Samantha was furious. "You want to redirect what? To foster kids? Are you serious?" "This money wasn't mine to begin with," he said. She rolled her eyes. "He manipulated you, even in death." David shook his head. "No, he reminded me of who I was. That's different." She threatened divorce. He didn't fight it. The next day, he filed paperwork to establish the foundation. And for the first time in years, he returned home, to that creaky old house just outside town. overgrown vines on the porch, dust on the steps. But when he opened the door, it was like stepping into a memory. And there, on the mantel, sat the urn. He picked it up gently, whispered, "I'm sorry." Years later, a boy named Miguel sat beside David on a wooden bench in front of the Walker Youth Center. "You were a foster kid too?" Miguel asked, wide-eyed. David nodded. "Once, I was angry, lost, thought no one cared." Miguel looked at the center's doors, freshly painted. "But someone did." David smiled faintly. "Yeah, he gave me a home, even when I didn't know what to do with it." The boy nodded slowly. A breeze passed, fireflies flickered in the grass, and in the quiet, David felt it, that warmth, that presence, not in wealth, not in buildings, but in the fire of second chances.